Hello, everybody. It's lovely to welcome you all here to our co-hosted Global Hiring Summit that we are, as Deel, putting on with our friends at Ashby. Just a couple of housekeeping bits. You guys can all use your live reactions, and also I'd love to know in the chat where we're being joined from today. We have a fantastic amount of individuals who have joined us globally, and as this is the Global Hiring Summit, please do let us know where you're joining us from. So I'm just going to give us just a couple of minutes just to do some housekeeping, and then we'll kick off when we've got a full house. So I'm very happy to say that we've been joined today by Raman from our own Deel team. She's our Director of Brand Communications, and she will be kicking us off with an introduction today. Our keynote speakers from Pave and Deel. Stephanie is going to be talking to us from Pave and Samuel from Deel. We've then got lightning rounds from an array of different industry experts. Jim from Ashby, Josh from hired.com, Mario from SignalFire, Grady from Brain Trust, Michael from Hofy, and that's absolutely brilliant. And then we will be joined at the end of this summit today with our panel of speakers, which are Sile, Jason, Guinevere, and Tiana from the likes of Metaview, Intrinsic, Lilt, and Render. So I'm really happy to be able to have all of your questions. Please make sure that you're all very active in the chat. We will be doing a Q&A as part of our panel session today as well, all around AI within global hiring and talent acquisition. So I'm really looking forward to answering those questions along with our panel. So what I'm going to do is kick off and ask Raman if she can please join the stage from us. So she's going to give us an overview of global hiring landscape.
Hello, everyone. Am I live?
You're live.
All right. I've seen this done 100 times internally at Deel, so I'm happy to join you all and know what it feels like on the other side. Good morning, everyone. I am talking to you all from California. I know I see people dropping in the chat right now, so it's very much my morning, but good afternoon, good night to everyone across the world. I am so excited to be kicking off our very first Global Hiring Summit. As you all can imagine, since we do global HR tech here, it's something that's very close to our heart. And this community, the folks that are hiring from and part of the global hiring pool, are really who we want to ensure have the right data and the latest information to make the appropriate choices when it comes to your organizations. So a little bit about my role here. A big part of my job is making sure that our data, which comes from 500,000 working contracts hired by over 30,000 global organizations, can be made actionable for you all. So I'm going to just kick off this summit talking about a little bit of what we saw in our last big global hiring report that's co-authored with Deel Lab, and you'll hear from Samuel later, and then give you a little bit of a teaser of what we're seeing for 2023. So I don't think this is going to come as any surprise to anyone in this room, but 2022 was not as rosy as maybe some of the other reports we put out. I think our talent pool, just like much of the industries we work with, was faced with a lot of global turbulence. And we saw things like terminations get as high as 42% of all terminated contracts by the end of 2022, which was a pretty steep increase from the 20-ish% that we saw in January. And it was also the first time that we had seen salary dips, even for highly competitive roles like software engineers. We ended up seeing a roughly 4 to 7% decrease net for new contracts by the end of the year. And also other key roles like account executives and accountants. But that being said, I think the standout trend that we saw in the report that brings us a lot of optimism is that global hiring at large seems to be a sustained trend that is not going anywhere. So it continued its momentum, and about 82% of all of our contracts were for remote roles. So I think our talent pool was maybe not dealing with as much of the RTO sort of back and forth that a lot of domestic counterparts were dealing with. And what was interesting is that this trend, while some people sort of think of it as like offshoring or nearshoring, our largest worker pool in 2022 was actually the United States. So the diversity of global hiring spanned from the US to talent pools like the Philippines. Bangalore, India actually overtook San Francisco as a top city for remote workers in 2022. So sort of the diversity of roles being hired and where they're being hired from has now shown that it's sort of proliferating globally. So, and some lucky roles, content, ops, and finance did see salary gains, especially in sort of a competitively priced market. So that was the good news. And I think even more exciting than that, looking ahead to 2023, we are starting to see a lot of bright signals. For example, in September of 2023, a key market, United States, actually saw a flatlining of terminations. So we saw a 0% increase of terminations in contracts, which obviously is welcome news to a lot of us. And I think an area that we're very excited about is sort of what we're seeing in AI hiring. So in the last 2 years, we've seen an 803% increase in contracts created for AI and AI adjacent roles. That rapidly accelerated since the launch of ChatGPT. So that's sort of like what we're really looking forward to for our 2023 report, and are excited to see how that trend encourages global hiring, and sort of where people are hiring from and what roles. But that being said, I may be the least smart person in the room. So I am very excited to hear from you all. I think the numbers can only show you so much. And what we really want to do more of is complement that with anecdotal feedback of people like you all who are sort of doing this day in and day out. So I'll be excited to hear what you all chat about today. And importantly, if we are now gearing up for the 2023 report. So if you are looking to hear about anything specific or you want to know about something that we haven't covered before, feel free to drop us a line, reach out. We want to make this as helpful for you all as we can. So with that being said, I will leave you all to hear from your other speakers and hope you all have a great summit.
Thanks, Roman. It was fantastic to have you kick us off. Fantastic. So now I am very happy to ask to join to the stage Stephanie. So Stephanie joins us as Head of Data at Pave. She holds a PhD in Personality Psychology and Statistics from Northeastern University, where she researched how machine learning and statistics can be leveraged to understand and predict human behaviour. Prior to Pave, Stephanie grew and led the data organisation at Humu. She has a deep expertise in HR data products and is skilled in technical leadership, product development, team design, and data storytelling. So you'll see now that Stephanie has joined us. When you see me pop back on again, Stephanie's got about a minute to go before we then hand over to our next keynote speaker. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. So today I'm going to talk about cracking the code to better global compensation. And first, just a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Stephanie and I'm the head of data at Pave. And in this role, I lead the team that builds our data products and creates data insights. And so I'm really excited to be speaking with you all today to share some common pitfalls of designing a global compensation strategy. And then also share with you some interesting and juicy data about the latest in global compensation trends. So first, a little bit about Pave. Our mission is to help companies scale and manage a global workforce, specifically through compensation. And so we're really a data-driven compensation platform. And we provide these global compensation tools that help people teams and finance teams and managers manage all compensation processes from beginning to end. And we help individual employees better understand their compensation and what it means. And our product suite achieves this in 3 ways. So first, we help organizations spend budget effectively through budgeting tools and analytics. Next, we help organizations build and scale fair and transparent pay practices with tools like band building. And finally, we help global organizations confidently acquire and retain key talent by making sure that employees' compensation is keeping pace with the market. And now, how do we know what the market is doing day to day and month to month? Well, our tool is powered by real-time HRIS and cap table and ATS integrations. So we're not relying on surveys or manual data entry to provide you with the compensation tools and data that you need. And instead, we're getting the data right from the source and getting it as real-time as possible. And that's particularly important in the market that we've seen recently and the turbulence that we've seen in the market and how things have been changing so quickly in the past 2 to 3 years. It's really important to have this up-to-date real-time data directly from the source so that you can understand and predict changes in the market as close to real-time as possible. And we are the largest compensation provider for private companies. So we have in our data set over 6,000 companies, and we have almost 1 million employee records in our data set as well. And these data points are across more than 46 countries, and we're adding more countries and more data points and more companies every single day. And so I bring this up to say that when I show to you some data insights today about what we're seeing in compensation data and how we're seeing the trends move, this is just really justification that we have this really enormous data set that's international and growing all the time and includes some of today's hottest and most influential logos to really emphasize the point that we've got this real-time data that really you should trust and that's quite comprehensive. And so I'm so excited to share with you all some data insights that we found from digging into these data. But before I get into the data, I'm going to just walk you through 3 compensation pitfalls that are really common in designing a global compensation strategy. And in my role at Pave, we're asked to help design global compensation strategies and provide data and information about how people are hiring globally, what they're doing, what the trends are. And so these are really common pitfalls that we see all the time, and I'm going to tell you how to avoid them. So these are paying one rate globally, using the cost of living to localize compensation, and not accounting for currency fluctuations. So first, paying one rate globally. So it's important to remember, and folks don't always realize or understand that the cost of labor is actually drastically different in different countries. And so if you are just paying one rate globally, if you have a compensation strategy where you say, you know what, I want to keep it really simple, and I just want to pay one rate across the globe, and so we're going to just anchor to, say, San Francisco Bay Area, as a result, you're going to be paying a lot more than really you have to in certain locations, and you're going to underpay in other locations and actually lose out on key talent and also have folks leave your organization. So I've pulled an example from our product here where you can see the geo differentials compared to the San Francisco Bay Area for a number of locations worldwide. As you can see, we have Munich and Portugal and France and Argentina and the Philippines. And as you'll see, you can see that the pay differentials in Germany are quite different than the pay differentials in Portugal. And so even if we said, hey, we only have, we're only going to do two location differentials here, as a result, if you were to say, hey, we're going to set just the San Francisco Bay Area and we're going to set to France, then if we used France for our international location, we would actually be underpaying in Munich and lose out on talent. Folks would leave our organization and we would be overpaying in these other locations. And so it's really important to stay very nuanced here about the geo differentials that you're using and not just pay one rate globally because they can be really quite different. The second pitfall that we see is folks using the cost of living to localize compensation. So oftentimes folks conflate cost of living with cost of labor. So you'll see here that I've pulled in as an example San Francisco and Zurich. And the cost of living in Zurich is about 13% higher than the cost of living in San Francisco. And so often folks see facts like this and they think, okay, that means that in designing our global compensation strategy, Zurich should be paid 113% of what San Francisco is paid. But cost of living is not directly correlated one-to-one with cost of labor. And so if we actually look at cost of labor, meaning what people are getting paid in that region, we'll see that Switzerland is actually getting paid less than the San Francisco Bay Area. And so even though the cost of living is more in Zurich, people tend to make lower salaries as compared to San Francisco there. And so if we were to use cost of living here to set our global compensation strategy and to hire folks in Zurich, we'd be overpaying by quite a bit, by about 40% in Zurich as compared to what other folks pay in that region. Taking another example in the opposite direction, here's San Francisco as compared to Sao Paulo, Brazil. And so we'll see that the cost of living in Sao Paulo is about 92% less than the cost of living in San Francisco. And so again, we often see people see those types of numbers and say, okay, sounds like then my salary should be 92% less in Sao Paulo than they are in San Francisco. But when we look at cost of labor, we see that they're about 58% less. And so this is a really big and meaningful difference, because if we were to use cost of living here, we'd be underpaying our team by about 50% in Sao Paulo. And I say underpaying, though truthfully, if we were underpaying by that much, I think we wouldn't have much of a team left because everyone would leave our organization for other organizations in the area that are paying more. We wouldn't be able to recruit or hold on to key talent. And so really it's so important, again, both for the overpaying and the underpaying, to make sure that we're using cost of labor and not cost of living to set our global compensation strategy. The third common pitfall that I see is that folks don't account for currency fluctuations. So currencies can change, exchange rates within currencies can change at really quick rates. And so I see a couple of problems here that folks run into. The first is that oftentimes folks look at their international salaries and they use a currency exchange rate, maybe that they've just sort of pulled once. So one extreme end of the spectrum, they're just pulling it once and then they kept it in a spreadsheet somewhere and they really don't update it regularly. The other problem that I see is that folks maybe try to be too real time and try to sort of every single day, look at like, what is the currency rate today, exchange rate today? And the problem with that is that currencies fluctuate really rapidly. And so really the ideal practice here is to choose a set of days, a day's window that you feel would be most appropriate for your organization, and calculate a rolling average. So 30 days is really common. We use 30 days in our Pave tool, where we say, okay, we're not just going to be over optimizing for these daily fluctuations in currencies, which actually can be quite erratic, but instead we'll use a rolling average to really get a better sense of what generally is this currency exchange rate. And importantly, it's important to keep that average rolling and updating, because again, we don't want to just pull a 30-day average and then leave that in a spreadsheet somewhere and then not visit that regularly, because currencies can change meaningfully and importantly, pretty drastically and pretty regularly. Related to this point is that I often see folks don't always think about in designing their global compensation strategy, global market movement and how markets are expected to change over time. And so typically in terms of global market movement, we see about a 7 to 10% growth rate for emerging markets and more like 2 to 4% for mature markets. And this is important to keep in mind because if you're hiring in emerging markets, you have to expect the growth rate to be higher, and you have to really stay on top of that and monitor it regularly. So again, not really an issue of where you can just sort of set it and forget it and set some compensation bands or set your compensation strategy in an emerging market and then just leave it alone. You're going to have to revisit it much more regularly. And you'll have to revisit it regularly to make sure that you're really staying competitive and that you are able to pay competitive rates. Otherwise, again, you're going to lose your talent to other organizations, or you're not going to be able to hire for your new roles. And so keeping in mind both these currency exchange rates and the global market movement really call into focus that global compensation strategies are not just a one-time thing, or we'll design it once, we'll just leave it alone, but rather something that you really have to keep your ear to the ground and really make sure that you're getting the latest information and using that information really effectively to make sure that you're paying the most competitive rates in your international locations. And I want to emphasize how important this is, because as an example, if we have 400 employees worldwide, say we're a 400-person organization, and we have about $32 million in global payroll, if we're just 1% over in our global compensation, that's an additional $320,000 in additional cost per year. And that's just for a 400-person organization. Imagine if your organization, maybe some of you have organizations that are 1,000 people or 5,000 people or 10,000 people. And so those costs really just add up and skyrocket for being just a tiny bit off on your global compensation. And that's not to mention all of the unmeasurable costs of lost productivity because we're trying to hire, doing interviews, but we can't get anyone to fill our roles because our pay is not competitive, or the costs of attrition and how devastating that can be to an organization, particularly losing key talent. So it's really, really important, both for the numbers and for sort of more of those unspoken costs, to get this stuff right. So speaking of getting it right, I want to share with you all the latest in global compensation trends, some really key and exciting findings that we found from our data. So at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned we have this real-time data set with nearly 1 million employees and over 6,000 organizations. And so we looked at our data to see what's going on in global compensation today. What are the trends that we're seeing in how people are paying globally? And hopefully in sharing these today, you all can leave with more information in designing your global compensation strategies and maybe correct some mistakes or be better informed in moving into the future. So I will share with you all the best markets for highly qualified, cost-effective talent, markets where salaries are increasing too rapidly to stay competitive, and the least affordable international markets by role. So first, the best markets for highly qualified, cost-effective talent. So we dug into the data and we looked at what are some locations, both within the United States and internationally, where we see a lot of technical talent and a lot of recent hiring for technical talent, but also relatively lower salaries. And so these are really key locations that maybe you and your organization want to focus in on, because sometimes we see that salaries can be lower in international regions or other regions, but there really isn't the population there that we're looking to hire. But these ones, in terms of technical talent, we see a really strong technical talent pool, but could be a more cost-effective option for your organization. So in the United States, we see really strong technical talent in Chicago, Salt Lake City, and Pittsburgh, but lower salaries when compared to San Francisco and New York and these tier 1 locations. And internationally, we see similar effects for India, China, Poland, and also more and more emerging Bulgaria as another option there. Second, we also pulled markets where salaries are increasing too rapidly to stay competitive. And so this is really fascinating to see. So with the rise of remote work, as well as very large tech companies, think these FANG companies that are expanding into more and more cities, more and more sort of new tech cities, we're seeing certain locations have salaries rise pretty rapidly to a degree that where maybe they used to have a reputation as having lower cost of labor. Now in the current environment, we're not really seeing that. And so I wanted to highlight these because sometimes if we're not keeping up to date with global compensation trends, it's easy to just hold on to a narrative that might be outdated and then make really costly decisions in designing your organization and your global compensation and hiring strategy of, where to build an office next or where to hire next. And so within the United States, these markets where we see salaries increasing really rapidly, this is an example from level 3 software engineers, but we see this in multiple roles, is in Atlanta and Austin, Texas. So want to highlight Austin, Texas in particular. We've seen a lot of growth there and a lot of tech offices opening, a lot of folks really expanding into that area and moving there in terms of remote work. And as a result, we just have seen a really steep trajectory for salary increases for this location. And so I call this out as an example of, keeping how important it is to keep up to date with global salary information, and also make sure that you're looking at these trajectories, not just the current state, when you're considering opening up an office or hiring folks in a given region. We'll also see this internationally as well. So 2 locations that I want to highlight are Belgium and Ireland, where we've seen really strong increases in salary there as well. These are just example salaries that we've seen over the past year or 2, but really important, again, to remember that we have to look at these trajectories as well. And finally, I want to share the least affordable international markets by role. And so I want to highlight this for a couple of reasons. The first is that often we do see, although we know the importance of looking at geo-differentials and looking at different tiers of salary internationally, we also really have to look at this by role. Because often what we'll see is that the most expensive regions for software engineers are not always exactly the same as the most expensive regions for go-to-market, and same with the least expensive. And so though paying one salary globally, of course, is the least ideal, and then looking at the countries to see what it should be the geo-differentials across all of our roles, that is certainly better. But really the best option here is to go a step further and not just look at geo-differentials broadly, but also look at across different roles. What are the different geo-differentials across those? Because often we see differences between roles and differences in the degree of affordability of locations or unaffordability of locations. And so for software engineers, we see that the most expensive or the least affordable international markets are Singapore, Switzerland, Israel, Ireland, and Denmark. And for go-to-market, we see that the least affordable international markets are Switzerland, Israel, Singapore, Australia, and Denmark in that order. And so overall, a lot of similarities between these lists, of course, but the rank order is different. And importantly, the degree of affordability of these is very different as well, compared to from go-to-market to software engineer. So for example, in Singapore, we see that a software engineer will pay 68% of the United States, but if we're looking at customer success in Singapore, that can be as high as more like 80% of the United States. And so it's really important to get that role-specific information. And just generally, we do see that go-to-market tends to be closer to the United States internationally a little bit as compared to software engineers. And so really important to know. Okay, so in sum, I want to reiterate these 3 global compensation pitfalls that we see very frequently and really call out how to avoid those. So again, we see that paying one rate globally is a really common pitfall, and really ideally is to not only use different pay for different locations, but also make sure that you're stratifying that by role to really get at the most competitive salary. We also see as a common pitfall using cost of living to localize compensation, but again, remember that cost of living is not always one-to-one to cost of labor. And so it's much more important to use cost of labor so that you can pay competitively in a given international market. And finally, we see people not accounting for currency fluctuations. So can't emphasize enough, definitely have a strategy here. These little fluctuations in currency, or sometimes big fluctuations in currency, can be really costly mistakes for your organization. And so make sure that you have a really robust strategy there where you're not just paying based on a random fluctuation in currency or anything like that. Thank you all so much. And if you'd like to learn more about Pave, you can go to pave.com/request-a-demo, and we'd be happy to talk with you more about our global compensation data and our compensation tools for making compensation more transparent and fair and making those processes a lot more accurate and easy to execute. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie, so much. We've had some very interesting questions in the question tab on our chat. So I'm going to invite Stephanie to answer those directly, given that she is the most qualified to do so, and we don't have capacity to do Q&A for each of the different keynotes. So Stephanie will hop on there now. Thanks very much for joining. And now we're going to move on to our next speaker. So I'd like to invite Samuel to join the stage, please. Samuel is one of my Deel colleagues, and he is going to talk us through global employment and where we are today from a compliance perspective. Samuel is Deel's Chief Policy Officer and Chair of the Deel Lab. Prior to Deel, Samuel was a European Union official, first working for the European Commission and then as a cabinet member at the European Court of Justice. Samuel's also a law professor at Cornell Law School in the US and also Queen's University in Canada, where he runs a lab on AI research for compliance and law. So Samuel, if you're able to join, here he is.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear.
Wonderful. So glad to see everyone. So as my dear colleague just said, so I am Samuel Dehan. I'm the chair of the Deel Lab and chief of policy at Deel. And my role is to think about what are important policy reforms that are going to be coming soon, and labor reforms also that we need to think about as HR professionals, as employment lawyers, and HR tech companies. So the Deel Lab has two missions. The first one is that we want to advance research in global work policy. As I just said, we gather data, we try to understand where global work policy is heading. So our second mission is we do AI research. And so if you will, we are the R&D arm of Deel. We create new AI technologies for compliance, for example, predicting worker classification and or termination compensation. So, but today I'd like to focus a little bit more on the policy angle. I'll bring up some of the examples, some of the tech that we've been building at the lab, but my main interest today, is to explore where we stand and what's the future of global work. So as my colleague Raman explained earlier, there's strong evidence that the market is globalizing fast. Deel has had currently has more than 200,000 workers, but over the last 4 years, we can say there's been about 500,000 workers, and the company has only been established 4 years ago. But they are, as my colleague just said, 2022 was a different year. Global hiring has sustained its momentum in 2022, with 89% of the contract were for remote workers. However, we've seen a lot of terminations, which makes sense. The market has been slowing down. Okay. So, but interestingly, hiring across borders has continued to outpace any downsizing trend. So it shows, at least for 2022, that the market is still, hiring is still growing. And what's interesting, what we've seen in our data, and we are working right now on the 2023 version of the global hiring report. But what's interesting now is that we see interesting patterns that we've never seen before from a political economic standpoint. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, but there are some, you could call them winners, and some of them that are not doing as well as others in this new global market. So for example, you can see the US is one of the hottest labor market for global workers. At least that's what we see on Deel's data. It's hard to say what's happening on for other companies, because we don't have all the data. From other competitors. So, and more interestingly, what's happening is that the U.S. labor market is overtaking fast-growing economies, fast-growing labor markets like the Philippines. So, as I said earlier, there are some terminations, and some areas also. Payment in crypto has been going down. What about payment? So payment has been increasing, especially in fast-growing labor market for some roles. So the Philippines, India, Brazil, they've seen the greatest salary increase in 2022. But there is also, we see some reductions in worker salaries for some highly a competitive role, like accountant, customer support agents, and so on. But the important question is, so that's what the data says about 2022 and the last few years. So there's evidence suggesting that labor market is growing fast. But the interesting, so if you're interested, you can have a look at the global hiring report for 2022. But the important question, the interesting question for us is global remote work here to stay? That's a hard question, but there are various variables that you need to take into consideration. I think the first one is what I would call the productivity bias. So I think many employers want to believe that remote work is suboptimal, at least a temporary solution. And that's why many of them are implementing return to the office policy. Okay. So in most places, it's not going very well because many workers are pushing back. Okay. But the important question is let's go back to the data and see, does working from home damage really productivity? That's really the key question that we really care about. So here's what the data says. So there's both macro and micro studies showing that working from home does not damage productivity. I mean, there's some studies that are showing the opposite. So in fact, data suggests quite the opposite. So there is this famous Stanford study that you may have heard of, which was ran actually in 2010. So that was a while ago. And they found a massive 13% increase in productivity. And that was way before COVID. Okay. So you can argue that this could be explained by several reasons, no time wasted at commuting, employer rarely late at work, there's less gossiping, shorter lunch break, maybe it's quieter at home. Okay. So however, there's some studies showing that full remote workers can in fact struggle with mentoring and innovation, and they're not as productive as they could be if they were hybrid or in person. Okay, but let's look at the macro results. So this is the latest studies based on a paper published by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And so 5 years before the pandemic, so what this paper says is that 5 years of pandemic, US labor productivity was at 1.2%. And since 2020, this picked up to 1.5%. So given the state of the world, that's at the time, that's absolutely miraculous. Okay. So, but again, the question is, what's causing what? I mean, that might have been caused by many factors. You can say, okay, so maybe easy money or and government expenditure. But usually, I mean, past evidence suggests that this is usually not associated with higher productivity. In fact, this is usually associated with lower productivity. So you could also say maybe that's related to tech progress, but tech hasn't been really exploding pre-COVID. I mean, video conferencing has been around for a while, so we didn't really create Zoom in 2020. I mean, Zoom and others have been around for a while. So, but another factor is working from home may have had an impact on this productivity boost because it cut billions of commuting hours and many other reasons that I've already mentioned before. So it's really hard to say which factor had an impact on productivity. But I don't think, I mean, I'm not an economist, I'm just a lawyer, but I think I like to see what my colleagues who are delving into that data say and the kind of data they're gathering. But I think one could argue that it is not outrageous to claim that working from home has had some kind of an impact on this productivity boost. But you could also argue that perhaps the debate should shift from productivity and we should focus a little bit more about profits and revenue. It's fact because that's what most companies care about. So even if let's say we are a little bit less productive, but eventually revenue doesn't really get affected, why should we care about that? Also, another problem with this debate surrounding productivity, return to the office, is that it's too anecdotal. There's not enough data-driven studies. We need a little bit more time to gather evidence on whether working from home is making us a little bit more productive or less productive. But bottom line, right now, the short answer is yes, it is that we are. It seems that working from home, it doesn't at least damage our productivity. Okay. So, but there's another problem with another question with global remote work is the regulation, or in fact maybe the lack of regulation. And in my opinion, in the opinion of many others, that might be seen as another hurdle. So, and it's interesting because that's a new problem, because work has never been truly globalized before COVID. So trade was, financial capital market was, but labor, global work was only a thing of a multinational company, right? So you're a large company, you can hire abroad because you can establish a legal entity in a foreign jurisdiction, and then you have the ability, the resources to hire lawyers in a foreign jurisdiction. But that's not the case anymore, thanks to COVID. Global work it doesn't concern only large corporation anymore. So now a lot of small to medium and medium-sized companies and even small businesses have been hiring abroad, and the data suggests also that there's been a lot of increase for global hiring, not only for multinational companies. But the problem is that the regulation hasn't changed. So in fact, there's no such a thing as international global work. I think many of my colleagues would disagree, but in fact, global work is not really a thing, because most legal systems have their own specific regulation. So when you want to hire globally, you need to get acquainted with domestic labor regulations, so minimum wage, termination, compensation in case of termination, pensions, and so on. So, but that's only one aspect of the problem. There are many other issues: worker classification, there's social security benefit, income tax and payroll, corporate tax, immigration, data securities, and you can also say IP and so on. Okay, so that creates a lot of complexity for international employers. So, but one of the main issues, in my opinion, is the question of worker classification. So it's been a very hot subject, so a polarized debate, if you will. So, but in the domestic context, in the national context, it is a fairly straightforward question. So, I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that issue. So maybe some of you are lawyers, but the law in most legal systems is fairly straightforward, at least in Canada, where I'm based, or in the US. It very much depends on the level of subordination. If you work for someone and you're working full-time and they control your hours, you don't really have, that's your main source of income, it's very likely you're going to be an employee according to the law, right? But that gets very complicated when you start hiring abroad, because if, let's say, a company X based in Montreal, they want to hire someone in Zurich, in Switzerland, what's going to happen is that they may have to establish a legal entity. But if I'm a small business, maybe I don't have the resources to hire a legal entity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire that person in Switzerland as a self-employed or as an independent contractor, which is kind of complicated, because first I need to know whether that person is genuinely an independent contractor. That means I need to know Swiss law, right? And the second question, if that's the case, I may have to set up a legal entity. And if that person is not a genuine independent contractor, there is risk of misclassification, and that's something that's quite problematic. But there are solutions for that. So, for example, companies like Deel have established a system of compliance, so that they can help global employers to hire anywhere and while remaining compliant with domestic employment regulation. In fact, at the Deel Lab, we are building an AI system for classification of workers that's about 95% accurate. So the system can predict anywhere in the world. So right now it only works in the US and Canada. It can predict whether a worker is an independent contractor or an employee. So, but that's not exactly, but the problem is that the law fluctuates. The reality also changes, and that makes a prediction a little bit more complicated. So in fact, what's happening is that we are training the algorithm to also pick up on the complexity of the case. So when the case is hard, for example, judges are not very confident on the outcome, the machine can show a confidence index, and so the idea is to facilitate that hiring process in different jurisdictions. So, but there are new regulations. So, for example, there's a new EU directive that's aiming to reduce the gray zone where there is some genuine ambiguity for workers between status of dependent employee versus self-employment. So the law is changing, and the idea is to make the system adapting with the data, with the legal data. So my colleague earlier talked about wage compensation data. We're looking at legal data and see how the judges are viewing the notion of worker classification. So here, I mean, if you're interested, we've just published the prototype of this first algorithm. So it is based on research I conducted at the university about 5 years ago, but now we've decided to roll it out to make it a public-facing, direct-to-public AI platform. So now it only works for Canada and the US, but by December, we'll be rolling out a global algorithm. And the target is for 2024, we'll be building a global algorithm that will cover more than 100 legal systems. So that's for worker classification. So as I said earlier, it is complex to define worker status at the domestic level, but it gets even more complicated at the global level, because if you don't have legal entity outside your jurisdiction, you may just have to hire a self-employed, an independent contractor. That's problematic. But however, there are companies like Deel that can help employers to make sure to guarantee that the person is qualified, is categorized in the right, with the right legal status. So, but there's another trend that's slowly picking up, is that the notion of self-employment is changing. Right? It is not likely that there will be only one category, but a number of countries have taken steps to include self-employed workers, at least some category thereof, under parts of labor and social security legislation. So there is some social protection coverage that will be offered to independent contractors and self-employees, and therefore the idea is that it won't be as complicated to hire independent contractors. So, for example, some legal systems have implemented reforms to ensure portability of social protection rights, even offered unemployment protection, or guarantee at least some basic level of social security. So it is possible that in some systems it might not be that complex. The division between independent contractor and employee might not be that complex, and therefore you may not even need to establish a legal entity and remain. But that's probably unlikely. I think it might be best to look at other solutions. So one of the best solutions that's been really growing right now is the employer of record. And Deel is an employer of record. There are a few others, but obviously Deel seems to be one of the most successful. So the employer of record, if some of you are not familiar with the idea, is I would call this an HR intermediary, an HR third party that enables businesses to hire workers in another country without establishing a legal entity, at least temporarily. So the ER is not the first time of HR intermediary, but it's a third party that helps to facilitate the hiring of a full-time employee. So as I said earlier, one problem with global work is that in some legal system, if you don't have a legal entity, you can only hire someone as a self-employed, as a self-employed individual. That's a problem because there's risk of classification. So now there's another option, which is the employer of record. You can hire that person as a fully fledged employee through a third party. So this means the third party, this EOR company, takes some of the responsibilities the employer, including compliance, including tax. It could be also immigration, and it's an evolving. It's very much of an evolving concept. So sorry, yeah, I skipped this slide. So this is how the employer of record works, and the employer of records is a model. I mean, it's growing extremely fast. It's gaining a lot of momentum. The market is projected to reach almost $7 billion by 2028, and it went up. It will go up from $4.2 billion in 2021. So it's a compound annual growth rate at 6.9%. That's quite significant. So, but there are still, limitations. So the employer of records and all the other and worker classifications are limitations. So the employer of records in many legal systems, it's only a temporary solution. Also, another problem is that a lot of governments, a lot of policymakers, a lot of HR professionals, a lot of lawyers don't even know what the concept is. I think for many people, the employer of records is associated with some kind of temp agency, which is very different from a temp agency. It is a tool that allows companies to remain compliant and allows company to hire full-time employees everywhere. So there are a lot of issues that needs to be discussed and needs to be engaged with policymakers, and that's what we've been doing at Deel. And if you are more interested in this area, you can reach out. Happy to collaborate. Happy to talk about these issues with any of you.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for your fantastic insights. And again, there have been a number of questions within the chat side, so please do hop on over there. I'm very excited that we are now moving on to our next speaker within our lightning rounds. So Jim is joining us today from Ashby. Jim is the VP of People and Talent. Prior to joining Ashby, he was the VP of Talent at Full Story, where he was an Ashby customer, and he loved the product so much that he then joined over onto their team. In Jim's 20 plus years in talent, he's also spent 15 years with Google, where he was the global head of online talent channels. And with the Ashby team, he is now building the team to the next generation TA platform to help companies excel at every step within the modern hiring process. So over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. So I'd like to talk to you about how to leverage data to demonstrate the value of TA to the greater org. I want to talk about how to more effectively demonstrate the value of TA through data by first helping your potential audience to understand talent data methodologies better. It might sound like a simple thing, but it's very easy for your audience to misinterpret talent data and to tell their own story, especially if they're conditioned to looking at other similar business data like sales waterfall metrics, for example. It's critical you educate your audiences on what they're looking at, what the logic is behind the data you're using, and why they should care about your methodology. Thanks. Let's dive into an example, please. So you show a chart to your finance team and your chief people officer. It shows a reduced pipeline into recruiting. Is that reduced pipeline a good thing or a bad thing? Well, that depends on the cause of the reduction. Right now, many teams are battling with a huge influx of inbound pipeline, and we're wanting to concentrate on higher quality applications. In this use case, this reduction of pipeline is great. But what happens if your audience has been conditioned to sales data, where that extra pipeline is a really good thing? If you haven't educated your audience on what to expect and how to interpret talent data, this pipeline reduction could immediately be seen as a negative situation, negatively reflecting on you and the TA team's efforts. You need to have explained that recruiting data and sales data is not the same, and that a fundamental difference between sales and recruiting is that pipeline, one of the terms common between the two functions, is not the same concept. In sales, that extra pipeline is an indicator of future success, of new revenue, of shiny logos, whereas in recruiting, too much pipeline is waste and therefore cost. When you look under the hood at this chart, using Ashby Analytics here, you can see that the quality of pipeline has improved, with less applications and more activity at later recruitment stages. This aligns to your aims of reducing the impact of excess pipeline. In talent, these later stages are the critical parts of your pipeline that you want your audience to focus on, not the top of funnel metrics. So you can go further. If you draw your audience's focus away from the top of the funnel and onto this latter stage data by isolating only those later stages of your recruitment process in a second chart, then your audience will really see the contrast, that the impact of your work is reducing waste and cost, and they'll see the value and impact of the quality you're driving. I lived this once. In October 2017, I made a fundamental change to Google's hiring practices by restricting candidates to 3 applications per month, whereas previously candidates have been allowed to apply to 30 jobs per day. This reduced the number of applications that were coming into Google by more than 1/3. Over 1 million applications were taken out of the process. In late January 2018, though, there was panic. An analyst had produced a report that showed that at current application rate versus past performance, Google would miss their 2018 hiring goals. Talent executives were called into crisis meetings. I was able to point out the error because I realized it was an impact from our earlier work. Can you guess what that was? Well, it was an input error. The analyst was using a standard sales waterfall model learned in their MBA. Applications fell by 1/3. Therefore, application to hire pass-through rate calculations said hiring would too. The missing fact was that the number of applicants, the humans behind the application, had not changed. The input was wrong. An application isn't equivalent to the sales qualified lead or opportunity. An applicant is. When the math was rerun, we could show a 33% decrease in applications and cost and double the hires from that applicant pool. Yeah, we doubled the number of hires from inbound year on year with 33% less applications. How? Because by restricting the number of applications the applicants could make, applicants started to choose the best fit roles for their skills and to only apply to roles that they were really aligned to their experience. We had created a scenario where the candidate was driving the right role for the right person at the right time at scale. What was the impact? Well, fewer applications meant less cost. More hires met business goals faster. More hires from inbound meant less need for sources, the most expensive channel. And it also caused a material impact on representation because of more hires from inbound, the most diverse channel. But we nearly didn't get to show off the value of our work because the first data pass was misinterpreted by the analyst who used that sales methodology. I found that using a framework, thank you, sorry. I found that using a framework to drive any kind of change is useful, and changing how your audience sees talent data is no different. Ashby has created a hiring excellence framework that, in combination with your stage of growth, can help you drill into where you need to be excellent at hiring. Our research has identified 4 distinct core talent competencies: strategy and planning, candidate attraction, candidate evaluation, and stakeholder engagement. Data is critical in driving excellence across those 4 competencies, in combination with the 3 cultural pillars of continuous improvement, operational efficiency, and organizational agility. In our examples earlier, of course, we would have been focused on the competency of candidate attraction. This model can facilitate and illustrate how you'll use data to underpin the great work your teams do to add value to your company. And with this model in hand to guide you and your audience, the data you produce will tell its own story about the value your team adds, while you, the talent team, focus on improving the quality and representation of your hires. We'll be releasing more resources on this model in the coming weeks, so if you're interested, please follow Ashby on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jim. And now I'd like to bring to the stage Josh. So Josh joins us as CEO of Hofy.com, and we'll be talking us through how to build an effective and inclusive global talent strategy. As I mentioned, Josh is the CEO of Hired, the most effective way and efficient way to fill tech and sales roles today, with unbiased insights, DEI features, and dedicated customer success managers, Hired matches talent around the world with top companies across the spectrum. As CEO, Josh is dedicated to transforming recruiting and hiring with more transparent, equitable, and rewarding experiences for candidates and employers.
Thanks so much, everyone, for having me. This has been a great session so far. As mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit today about how to build an effective and inclusive global talent strategy. For those of you who are not familiar with Hired, we are a hiring marketplace. The company has been around for about a little over 10 years. What we do is we help companies build tech and sales teams by introducing them to a highly curated collection of talent that's been vetted for both quality and intent. So candidates apply to be on Hired. They also can take some additional assessments to prove out their skills in various technical and sales areas. What that results for companies is a 90+% response rate, 50+% interview acceptance rate. And as I'm sure you all are fully aware, over the past several years, companies have been expanding from, mainly in-person remote work to remote work. COVID obviously has further accelerated that, but companies, especially looking for top tech talent, have started pushing the envelope to hire talent globally. And so Hired has also expanded our candidate base to 60 plus countries, and have teams from Series A startups to multinational Fortune 500 brands, hiring tech talent all over the world and sales talent all over the world through Hired. And we obviously partner with all the companies that are putting on this event to provide not only the sourcing, but also the end-to-end employer record, working with companies like Deel to make sure that those people can be paid and get the benefits that they need. One of the great things about this expansion of hiring, of companies starting to hire globally, is that it is a key piece of company strategies at building an inclusive and diverse workforce. It has been proven, I don't think I need to explain this to you, but it has been proven time and time again that having a more diverse team produces better results in the end. And we also are able to leverage all the platform activity data, post success data of people that we placed, of the 30,000 plus people that we placed at companies, and we provide a lot of data to the general market about leveraging not only the marketplace data, but also survey data of our employers and also candidates to learn about really the impact of DEI. And it really fits very squarely within Hired's vision of a world that all hiring is equitable, transparent, and efficient. And again, our mission here is to empower connections between ambitious people and teams. I talked a little bit about Hired and what we do, but some of the tips that I would say in terms of building a inclusive workplace is around starting from within your company. So talent acquisition teams cannot be the sole owners of the DEI strategy, and most teams today already have diverse teams in some aspects. So make sure that there are channels and ways for people to engage in the diversification efforts that are going on across the company. It is shown that diverse teams produce better creativity, innovation, and problem solving. Also, one of the things that we highly recommend, and we obviously do at Hired as well, is internal bias training. This can really change the behavior and educate people. Right, when we build hiring teams, they tend to be, outside of the recruiting function, they tend to be people that really are across the business, and hiring is not their main job or skill set. So it's really important to have consistency with that hiring process, with the interview questions that are asked of each candidate that is going through that process, to make sure that biases are left aside. Again, there's a lot of unconscious bias that goes on, and so it's a really challenging thing to solve for. So we really highly recommend internal bias training. And a lot of the best practices starts with a job description. So make sure that you are having language that is not biased, and people that leverage hired can use things like first party data on the underrepresented or statuses of candidates, bias filters, salary bias alerts that make sure that you are, if you're putting salary offers out, that you're doing it in such a way that is not biased, and obviously time zone filters and remote filters to allow people to figure out the right mix of candidates for you. It looks like I might be out of time. If you do want to learn more about how Hired can help you build an inclusive global team, here's a QR code to request a demo. And thanks so much for the time.
Thanks, Josh. You got my subtle cue. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm now very happy to be able to move on to our next speaker and ask Mario to join us. So Mario is coming to us from SignalFire. He's a seasoned talent acquisition leader with a background in startups and publicly traded organizations. He is currently with SignalFire VC, as I mentioned, where he's responsible for overseeing talent and recruiting strategy, as well as advisory programs for their innovative portfolio companies. Over to you, Mario.
Thank you so much. Hi, folks. Nice to meet you all. Today, I'm going to be talking about hopefully the very important topic to most people, which is understanding the importance of a strong hiring and onboarding experience and how that can make or break the employee experience. I think this is an important topic to dive into, not only for the obvious statement of a great employee experience, but also how this behooves the business to build a more structured and effective process with all new employees coming into a company. So I'll start off with a stat that hopefully will kind of help underscore the why here and kicking us off. So according to a recent study by Bamboo HR, onboarding has been such an important part of starting an employee off on the right foot. When new employees have an organized and engaging onboarding experience, it's made those employees feel 18 times more committed to their new employer. I think we've all had the experience of having either a great onboarding experience or a not so great onboarding experience. And it might be obvious to say that those experiences where we did get a thorough and inclusive and welcoming onboarding experience really set us off on the right foot and really allowed us to hit our stride quite quickly. Not only adding to the sense of belonging, but also adding clarity and consistency and understanding, what is expected from these new employees in the short term and the long term is incredibly important. And aligning that onboarding experience with the interviewing experience is a very important throughput to have as a hiring manager, but also as somebody that's onboarding a new employee. But there is the opposite experience, right? I think we've all either witnessed somebody in the field or a friend, colleague, family member that's had a less than savory onboarding experience. And probably an obvious downfall to that is that employee experience is poor, and tenure specifically is poor in connection to that bad onboarding experience. So according to SHRM, 33% of employees with poor onboarding experiences were looking for new roles within the first 6 months of their time at the company. And 23% of those folks left within the year, so before their year one anniversary. So kind of guiding everybody into this whole experience and how this is not only bad for the brand, but bad for the business in terms of this person that's come on board to be effective and to be a productive member of the team and helping us spearhead the efforts and moving us forward into the right. Think of all the time and the effort that it's taken, not only recruitment and talent to be able to bring in these great folks in a very competitive talent market, but also the efforts of hiring managers and other stakeholders that have been active participants in bringing these people on board. And because of a poor onboarding experience from the handoff through TA to onboarding, not being a strong bridge, this has very negative effects in terms of how folks can find their place within an organization. So hopefully this is a eye-opening stat, not only for people leaders, but for business leaders across an organization. So simply stated, an onboarding program definitely pays off. A strong onboarding program definitely pays off. The opposite effect was reported by Harvard Business Review, stating that new hires with a great onboarding experience were 62% more productive on average. So coming in, understanding, their short-term and long-term goals, understanding how that ladders up to the effectiveness of the business and their team specifically, was something that aided to this productivity rate boosting up. And 50% of folks had greater retention, on average, of staying at the company with a strong onboarding experience. So having that onboarding program definitely boosted productivity quickly and therefore cemented that person's place within the organization, helping them see the long-term effects of their work and how it positively affects the business. So what can you do to be one of those folks or one of those companies that builds experiences that are effective for all new employees joining your company? Plainly stating, investing in onboarding program definitely is important, and don't over-engineer it, right? I think, companies on this call may be small, may be large, but having an onboarding program, within itself is an important first step to take. Larger companies have more resources. Startups obviously have less. So I want to encourage everyone on this call to know that even if it's a lightweight onboarding experience, that you should definitely invest in it. So first, have role alignment with the role that they were hired for, connected to performance expectations. So ensure that you're having 30, 60, 90-day check-ins and ensuring that they understand, how their role is effectively producing the right results for the company and for the team. Team and culture is very important. So find authentic ways of interacting with this new teammate, asking them their ways of communicating and their norms, but also finding authentic ways to get to know them individually, but also setting them up with getting to know important stakeholders at the company is incredibly important. Then lastly, learning logistics and compliance. Compliance is a funny one to put in here, but how many of you have struggled to find your insurance cards and all the important information that you need to know, like employee handbooks? I know it sounds dry, but it's important, and it could be a big waste of time if you don't identify the right places for people to find the right things. And lastly, depending on your company, their unique value proposition and how they're addressing the market that they're serving, ensure that you have industry and domain specific trainings and that they're able to come up on that expertise as quickly as possible. Thanks for the time, folks. Very happy to be here, and I'll pass it back over to Kate.
Thanks, Mario. That was fantastic. And I'm here for the admin. Now I would like to welcome to join the stage Grady, who is the founder of Distributed Labs and builders of Brain Trust. Over the past 4 years, he's helped over 1,000 clients hire global talent, worked with Fortune 100s and hundreds of startups. Clients spanning every industry, primarily focusing on IT and tech talent and creative talent. So he knows all about the ins and outs of the full talent ecosystem. Over to you, Grady.
Thanks, guys. Well, happy to be here. I don't know what this weird background is on me, so that's fun. But nice to see you guys. So I spent the last 5 years building out Brain Trust, which is a large decentralized talent network. So where we specialize is going to be like IT, digital design and creative folks all over the world. Us, much like Hired, are highly vetted talent. We want to make sure that we're matching quickly and helping everybody on the client side of the equation find the right people they need very quickly. And then on the talent side of the equation, we've got a unique model where our whole network is what we call talent owned. So the primary owners of Brain Trust are actually the talent themselves. So our goal is to basically always represent them, make sure the network is highly efficient, low cost, and a great way for both sides to have a good experience. Why I bring that up is, I spent the last, 4 or 5 years probably helping clients hire probably 2,000 plus clients hire global talent all over the world. And I have the same conversations with almost everybody, whether it be very large customers or very small customers. Everyone kind of asks the same setup of questions around either talent strategy, things to do, why do it, why not. So I kind of put in the basic stuff here that I thought would be good to kind of resonate with everybody. One, everybody knows the benefits for the most part of global talent hiring. One, where we focus is going to be like more IT, highly technical folks. And especially as you branch into some of the new technical skill sets out there, AI, machine learning, data science, even some of the blockchain crypto, like you need to open up your search. If you're confined to geolocation, like you're going to be in a world of hurt when it comes to finding the right talent, competing with local groups, those type of things. Speed to hire is going to be critical for most companies, especially in the startup front, where you're trying to bring the right people in the first time and usually pretty quickly because there's some burning tasks. So like opening up the geo search is just going to lead to faster hiring. And if you can figure out how to work effectively, you can get a full cycle where you're working with people offshore, off domestic time zones, and being able to get work done 24 hours a day. And then lastly, like cost. Everybody's a little bit cost conscious, right? You want to get the best talent at the best rates. What we're seeing is probably 10 to 60% in reality as far as like cost savings we can see for equally skilled talent, depending on where you go. Somebody presented before, there's definitely certain countries that are like much better at certain technical skill sets, have less like markups and fees and those type of things for in-country regulations. So like do your homework on that stuff, but definitely very worthwhile strategy. What I normally see is like people kind of fit in one of these like 5 areas, and like left to right gets like significantly easier and better to hire. We work with a lot of like very large banks and insurance firms and healthcare companies, and these are like highly regulated and they like move super slow. They're like in office, going back to office, hybrid locations, these type of things. And like the result of that is like they hire very slow. They get like, I'd say mid-level talent, because they're not opening up the doors for what most higher paid and more excited and more, I'd say skilled talent are like looking for remote work, all these type of things. They overpay and they're like slow to innovate. Everybody's been on like a banking app lately and they're not the best experience. And then on the far right, like we see the most innovative companies, most startups, everybody's starting to go global every direction they can to just bring in the best talent for their particular thing. We're seeing them innovate faster. We see all the blockchain companies, any crypto company, any of the AI companies, all these guys are looking globally for talent. They're moving much, much faster. And we're seeing typical hire times in like 12, 13 days, where the other guys are like a couple months. Some do's and don'ts for success here. So this kind of basic stuff, but you guys probably get it, is like, think about hiring contractors. If you're thinking international, like you could be interviewing people remotely. They feel like a good fit. Like go test them out for a month, go test them out for 6 weeks, 6 months, and then think about bringing them on as an FTE, those type of things. It's a great way to know if they're going to fit with your company culture. And it's a great way to like try before you buy. Definitely increase level of communication and specificity. Specifically, like if you write an email that's the wrong thing for them, and then you've got to wait 24 hours or a whole evening cycle or a whole day cycle for them to respond, like it's just a total time suck. So like tighten up your communication across the board is a big way that we've seen like customers be successful. Research the companies or the countries in which you want to hire, skill set, cost. And then like the guy, last person was just presenting, find ways to make them feel connected, right? Like make them feel like they're part of your core team, include them in happy hours, in personal Slack channels, get them on your daily huddles, stuff like that. Like make them feel very, very inclusive is a big way to make productivity advancements internationally. And then on the right, like I see this happen a lot. Like people are like, hey, I want to hire this person. They say they can work my time zones, but it's their first time working this time zone. Like, don't hire those people is my advice. Like, get people who have, if you want them to work US time zones, but they're based in Europe or based wherever, like make sure they've done it before. Like it's a big lifestyle change for folks. And like, you don't necessarily want to be the guinea pig on their first time doing that is my personal advice. Be smart, not cheap. Like don't underpay just because they're like in some other country, right? Like be at the top of the stack. They're going to be usually lower than what you're going to pay for US people. Like overpay a little bit in country. They're going to freaking love it. And you're going to be a hero over there. And you're still going to get a discount in many areas. And then, you know, be biased towards things that matter, right? Or that don't matter. Like, don't do this. Like if English is a little bit off, like these type of things, like, and you think they can still perform the work, do it, right? Like move forward, get them into a contract basis and go test these folks out. And then lastly, like don't skip vetting and compliance. Like we got the guys on from Deel. They're freaking amazing at this and like very fantastic partners for us. And then lastly, I see I'm getting kicked off here, which is great. You're not alone. Like hiring now is like way easier than it was like 3 years ago internationally. Like there's talent networks out there like us, like Hired, like these others. There's lots of global EOR and compliance companies that you can work with. And there's just tons of tools now that make this like way more approachable. So like, I'd encourage you guys to get out there, talk to groups like us. We're happy to help. I'll drop my email in here and thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Grady. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm now going to welcome to the stage our final lightning round speaker, who is Michael, joining us from Hofy. Michael is Chief Product Officer, where he leads product, global logistics, and IT services development. He studied engineering at UCL, which means that he's a fellow Brit, where he met co-founder and CEO Sammy. So over to you, Michael.
Hey everyone, thanks. How's it going? Great to be here. Yeah, we started Hofy 3 years ago. What we do is equip remote workers anywhere in the world with devices and the IT services they need to be successful and do their best work. So a lot of these tips over the next 5 minutes are going to be very much focused on onboarding, offboarding, equipping remote teams, security, etc. As the title suggests, leveraging logistics to enhance candidate experience remotely and globally. So there's a couple of key interesting formatting coming through here. There's a couple of key benefits around having a top-notch onboarding experience and then ensuring that the security of whatever tools or devices you're giving your team members to work on is up to scratch. Main benefits of that are around talent attraction and retention. So there's a lot of studies that have been done on the relationship between onboarding quality and long-term retention of employees. I think someone actually mentioned this earlier, that there's a really strong correlation. So the numbers I have are that 69% of employees will likely stay for 3+ years if they have a great onboarding experience, which is far, far higher than what that would be if they have a crappy onboarding experience. And some other studies are saying that about 1 in 10 people want to quit because of slow tech. So they don't have the tools that they need to succeed. Mainly that's around devices, but that could be around software they're using, that could be around internet connections. Second major benefit to thinking about the logistics of remote work and onboarding and tools is data security. So latest data is showing that a typical data breach is costing a business in the US about $4.45 million. So that's going to include all of the losses due to the data breach, fines, legal fees, etc. So there's a lot that goes into that, but it's a significant chunk of money. So you want to make sure you're really, really on top of your security when it comes to global employment and the devices you're using for your team wherever they are in the world. So what do we do about this? How do we take advantage of these benefits? The top tips I have from running Hofy for the last 3 years, we're a global remote team. We're 120 people. We've got customers that are thousands of people equipping their remote workers all over the world in hundreds of countries. The top tips I've got is around your global logistics and specifically around delivery. So ensuring that products are delivered on time for end user start date. There's nothing worse than starting a new job and not having a device to get going. A lot of companies now, a lot of all your businesses will not allow people to work remotely on personal devices. So ensuring that those devices are delivered on time before the employee's start date is pretty critical. The second thing from being on top of this is we maximize employee uptime. So if an end user has an issue and they're in the office, it's probably pretty easy for them to go and get that fixed. But if they're in another country or another time zone, it's really hard. And what happens then is that you lose time, and time is money because you don't stop paying them if their device stops working. The third thing to consider, or like the benefit from really getting on top of this stuff, is data protection. So you can always think about a device as being two components, really. One is getting the physical product to that person. The second is ensuring that the data on that device is secure. So all in all, we see a lot of businesses working on equipping global remote teams and trying to do it kind of cheaply. They're trying to save money. And the main thing that we tell these people is it's not worth cutting corners when you're equipping a global remote team. All of these things around employee experience, employee uptime, the potential for a data breach are just huge and massively outweigh any small savings you can make in using a lower cost courier to get the product to someone, trying to find a cheaper product elsewhere. It's just not worth it. So when you look at the sort of second order effects and the broader issues at play, it's really not worth cutting corners. Obviously, that's where Hofy comes in and we support our customers. But the general takeaway is that the maths just doesn't work. It's really worth investing in this space because the benefits are huge.
Thanks, Michael. That's really useful. And you win gold star. Bang on 5 minutes. Now I'm going to thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm also going to move us on to our panel. So I am going to welcome to the stage Guinevere, Tiana, Sail, and Jason, who will each be able to tell you all a bit about who they are. Please keep being active in the question and chat function because we will have time for Q&A for this particular session as well. Apologies to Guinevere, your name is spelled without your W. I did update it. I'm not quite sure that's why that hasn't come through for your side, so my apologies. So while we wait for Tiana to be able to join us, Guinevere, please could you kick off your introduction for us?
Absolutely, happy to. I'm Guinevere Curry. I'm the founder and CEO of Guide to HR. It's an HR consultancy that supports startups, small size, and nonprofits from all aspects of people operations. And additionally, if that's not enough, I also work at Lilt as the VP of Global People Operations. And Lilt is an advanced contextual AI solution for enterprise translation, localization, making the world's information available to everyone, irrespective of their language. So that's a little bit about me. I'll pass it on to Jason.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Gingrich. I lead recruiting at Intrinsic, which is one of the alphabet companies creating software tools for the industrial robotics space.
I'll jump in next. Hey, folks. Sail here, the co-founder and CEO at Metaview. We're building the AI assistant, AI meeting assistant for recruiters. So we make it so that recruiters don't have to focus on taking notes anymore. We structure them and reformat them for you so you can focus on building great relationships with candidates, which we're finding is a really, really powerful use of AI.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tiana. I lead talent over at Render. We're solving the cloud infrastructure problem for software engineers, helping them get things spun up a lot faster.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. So what I'd like to do is kick off with one of our first questions, I'm going to ask Sile to take this one. The way we're going to structure this is I'd love for everyone to be able to jump in for any additional thoughts. We certainly aren't going to do this question's for this person and so on. I'd love all of you to be able to share your insights. But first off, Sile, how do you feel from your perspective, and obviously Metaview's perspective, is how global hiring has been impacted by AI, and what are the opportunities that you see?
Yeah, great sort of foundational question, really. So the way that we see the most impact being had at this moment within recruiting from AI is really in how it affects the day-to-day of recruiters. So turns out there's been a bunch of tasks associated with recruiting that people have long sort of complained about, frankly, and maybe not seen as their favorite part of their job. And then there's a bunch of other activities which are much more human, like connecting with candidates, connecting with hiring managers, that sort of suffered as a consequence of the amount of time and energy that those tasks took up. So really, I'd say the biggest impact that we're seeing is a lot of those tasks, those sort of more toil or drudgerous tasks that recruiters often have to sort of spend a bunch of their energy on, are melting away, increasingly being sort of gobbled up by these foundational AI capabilities that are changing the game, which is really freeing them up to become that more talent advisor, strategic partner to their hiring managers or the function they're working in. You see this sort of across the gamut within recruiting. Obviously, a big area of focus for us is in the actual interactions that recruiters have with candidates. So all of those jobs that you're almost doing while you're talking to a candidate, be that sort of ferocious, frantically note-taking, or afterwards sort of reformatting those notes to pass them on to the hiring manager so they have the information they need. Taking that sort of drudgery away is the real first step. I won't go sort of too far into step two, but just where we see this sort of increasingly starting to emerge as well is, if you think of that first step as automation, how can we automate away some of the things that we don't love about recruiting or aren't high leverage? The second step is around detection. How can we start to identify problems or areas for improvement within how we recruit that previously were almost quite imperceptible because we didn't have the data? It wasn't conceivable for me as a recruiter to go and talk to everyone that's involved in hiring because it's such a team sport and make these observations. But actually now AI can help us do those things. Happy to sort of like explore more what we mean by that, but also appreciate we've only got half an hour and don't want to sort of dominate too much of the time.
Thanks, Tiana. I'd love to hear your input. How are you finding it?
Yeah, I think it's really changed the landscape of, I think, like the future people and talent. So I think that those who are like embracing and kind of using AI and kind of diving in, trying to figure out like what are the best tools, what are the things that I can do to help help my talent operations. So I think people in talent operations, like we were already thinking about this stuff for years. Like we're always thinking about how to buy people's time back. So we're always thinking about those things that are top of mind to help you scale. But I think the humans that are like embrace AI are going to be the people that will really succeed as the next generation of recruiters or talent leaders, because they're already thinking about things from that like mindset. And so I think that that's going to be like a pretty big shift in terms of who the next generation of people and talent are going to be.
Jason, I see you nodding ferociously. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm also going to kind of address this from a different angle about how AI is actually impacting the work of recruiters, building on a comment that Jim made earlier, where when we have more pipeline, it means we have more waste, which means that there's more cost to the business. So what happens in a world, a hypothetical world, where every candidate puts their resume in a job description through a Gen AI tool, and then from the application side, we see that every single inbound applicant appears to match your job or your role profile or what you're hiring for. In that world, the job of a recruiter, the job of talent acquisition becomes even more important than it is today, to take away that time spent through the interview process. And where I think AI tools can really impact and give lift to recruiting talent acquisition professionals is both in talent intelligence and in interview augmentation. Interview augmentation is very similar to what we've chatted about already. Better notes, better screens, higher quality candidates, and better pass-through rates. Talent intelligence, in the future, I think, having tools that can source from different or disparate data sets is kind of going to be table stakes. Where I hope the industry will start moving towards is aggregating more than just where the candidates are coming from, but also providing information about those companies in particular. What stage are they at? What other awards have these candidates won? Did these candidates join that company at a time of growth, at a downturn time, giving us more data than what we've had in the past? That's where I hope to see the tools and the industry kind of progress towards. And let me give some time back to the rest of the speakers here.
Thank you. It's so fascinating, all the tools, and I'd love to understand, Guinevere, from you, how you're maintaining the human element, because obviously we understand the importance of implementing AI into the hiring process, but you are ultimately hiring human beings. So I'd love to understand how you feel that it's important to balance that and how individuals can think about balancing that.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is ghosting. We've heard so much about, companies now ghosting candidates, candidates now ghosting companies. And I think for me, when I think about my candidate experience, it's making sure that no one has that experience, right? They hear from me, even if it is an automated message, at least they know, okay, I'm no longer, someone that is being considered for this role. I think the second step is really finding a way to engage with your candidates that you are sourcing and or that come through your pipeline that continues to have that touch point, right? I mean, I come from a very small company. Some companies that are larger, tens of thousands of people, they're not going to be able to talk to every single candidate that comes through the door, but to at least have some interaction with them, a recognition, accepting their resume, thanking them for applying in their consideration. And a lot of tools out there, and I know Ashby spoke earlier, they have all of that functionality. So taking the time to make sure you set up your tools to have those touch points with your candidates is really important. And this last part for me is, I can't tell you how many times I have read on Glassdoor, on LinkedIn, on other social media platforms, people going through multiple rounds of in-person or online speaking to a human being interview and then being ghosted. Like, that is the worst candidate experience you can ever have. So again, making sure that your tools are working for you to have those touch points with your applicants, no matter if they've applied and if they don't fit, or you've worked them all the way through your structure to the point of you decide not to give them an offer and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've all had experiences of being ghosted, and when I've hired in the past, way before any of these tools were available, I just used to set up just a really standard template within my Outlook, just to make sure I could get back to everyone. It's so damaging for brand reputation, especially. Cool. So this is all very positive, but what are the risks, Sile, and how can we mitigate it?
So I think the risks really sort of come into two buckets. One is one that's like very controllable by people on this call and people that are viewing this call, and then one that sort of does actually like is far bigger than us, because there's obviously massive companies building these models and whatnot. The one that's very controllable by us, which is probably the better one to focus on, is essentially our attitude to these tools. So there's a risk that what we do is we treat these tools as these generative AI tools that are coming up with essentially new perspectives, new content. We treat what they come up as good, no matter what, sight unseen. I'm not going to judge it. If an AI outputs this outcome or this piece of content, that's good, and therefore I'm going to use it. I think that was especially prevalent when people first started to play with tools like ChatGPT, where people were like, oh wow, it wrote a job description for me. But yeah, but was that job description, did it help you attract the right talent and get the right people in front of your hiring managers? Like, we weren't really putting it through that filter. So I think that's a really important idea, and I would actually push it one step further and say it's really important that everyone in every industry, but obviously we'll focus on recruiting, understands that accountability has not changed. It is still you and your teammates that are accountable for bringing great folks into the company, are accountable for giving candidates a great experience. What you're going to do increasingly over time is work out where you want to leverage yourself with AI, or maybe even outsource some of the areas of your work to AI. But even those parts you outsource, you'll still be accountable for. So I think it's a really important lens to push things through, because otherwise, of course, this is a revolution, right? This is a productivity revolution. There will be collateral damage in the way. There will be mistakes along the way as well. And, we need to accept that we're accountable for that. That's an important thing to help us accelerate the adoption of these tools, is an understanding that we are still accountable. I think the second sort of area of risk, which in some ways is sort of handled by if we get the first point right, is essentially the sort of the well-trodden points, I would say, around potential bias output of some of these tools. So the way that we think about how AI can be leveraged really focuses on three different buckets. Two that I mentioned already: automation, which tends to be a great thing no matter what. If we can automate away work that we don't find inspiring, that's a good thing. Detection, can we find out information that we previously couldn't because we're getting it surfaced by some of these AI tools? But then the last point is around decisioning. And of course, a lot of the discussion around adoption of AI is what, if any, decisions do we feel comfortable letting AI make for us? And I think that's the area where the sort of the real sort of strenuous due diligence is most applicable when we're thinking about how we want to let these models into how we work. There's obviously some good examples around, when I guess as a society we lacked the maturity of understanding of how to use these models. I think there's the Amazon story of an AI model that rejected candidates that played volleyball because it turned out they didn't have so many folks in their current company who played volleyball, who was already sort of predominantly male, and maybe there's a skew on that game, that sport towards more female candidates. So these weird sort of situations that we sort of will only realize it and on retrospect and realize, okay, that's not what we want out of these models. So I think that sort of generally is an area for concern too. I think the sort of second order risk there though is what we're seeing is that a sort of open mind towards experimenting with these AI tools, especially in this more automation and detection bucket of activity, is a good thing. And then I think more of a strenuous look at things when someone is saying an AI can make this decision for you, then I think a really sort of like fine-tooth comb look at the product makes more sense.
Has anyone got anything they'd like to add? I think there's probably some other ideas. Guinevere?
Absolutely. So I think it also comes down to like job descriptions. A lot of the tools that we're starting to see that we can use in the recruiting aspect, you can put the job description in. It helps source candidates based off the job description, and voila, you've made your life a lot easier. The problem is if your job description has biases in it, you've automatically introduced bias into the AI sourcing. So really, I think it starts with your job description and making sure that you're really reviewing the description to ensure that biases are not in there. Great example of the volleyball sports metaphor. So appreciate that.
One additional perspective that I kind of wanted to kind of add is that I really think recruiting at its core is an art of matchmaking. And so you really need humans to be a part of the decision and how you network and how you match people. It's really like a marriage. You're trying to kind of make that long-term fit. And so when it comes to this, I think of this from coming from an Indigenous background. I'm Native Hawaiian, for example, and the way that we actually storytell our history is not by doing keyword matching to a job description, for example. The way that we actually tell where we came from and the things that we've done and the impact that we've made is done in a more creative way. It's done in a narrative where the way that I tend to write my resume is very different than the way that of just kind of putting bullets of things and ROI and how things tracked. And so I think what I think from like someone who comes from an underrepresented background is that if you're using AI to make the decisions on how my resume is going to get through, I'm not going to probably get through to the right companies. But if you have a human looking at the way that I'm storytelling my history and the work that I've done and the impact that I've made, it takes an extra set of eyes to really see the value in that. And that ultimately will hopefully match me with the right company when you think about candidates coming from that lens. So just to add a little bit into there around like the impact that it has on certain communities.
That's really interesting. And Jason, I'd love to just move that on to find out from you, as far as the impact on how assisting talent teams to reduce the workload in the selection process and aid hiring decisions, and how you can envisage us being able to get that balance.
Yeah, balance is key there. I think balance is kind of the thing that you need to kind of keep in mind there, because there are certain things that these AI systems excel in relative to what a human can do. I like to think of it primarily as pattern matching, but to our points here, when we let that AI over-index on pattern matching, you're also missing out on the human element of reviewing that story, of understanding your internal culture. You know, what these AI systems, at least as far as I understand, can't yet do is really internalize what a company needs, internalize what a company's culture is, and really making sure that those candidates are actually a fit. You know, the way I have always looked at things like even a resume or a job description, I mean, these are just pieces of paper that reflect slices of time, either a slice of what you've done recently, the way you've decided to tailor your resume for a job description in of itself sometimes represents a problem that we're looking to solve for today, but then what's the story? What's the impact beyond that? And on balance, you know, in certain areas, it is okay to let that AI focus on the things that it's good at, pattern matching, aggregating data. But having that human element to cut through the noise, I think, is so important. A very tactical example where I would be very surprised if an AI system could do something like this. There was a candidate that I reached out to somewhat recently where I had to really follow up on multiple times. A traditional messaging campaign or drip campaign wasn't working. So as a lot of tenured recruiters will do, I went to go find out what other sort of information I can find out about this person. This sounds a little creepy, I'm going to acknowledge that, but sometimes this is what we have to do. I found a Pinterest page. I found a quote that stood out to me as a human, and then I used that in my messaging approach in trying to just have a conversation with this person. And that Pinterest quote aligned not only with what I had assumed was important to that individual, but also aligned with something that was important for our company's culture or our behaviors. I don't know if AI systems will be able to do that in the short term. Open question on the future. But having that balance of using both approaches, I think, is what's going to lead most companies to success.
I love that. I'm a stalker too. You've got to get those insights and make them work for you, Jason. Fantastic. So, Guinevere, can you sum up for us what the value of bringing AI into the hiring process looks like for you?
Well, today it's actually been able to bring me candidates that I wouldn't have been able to find otherwise. The sourcing has just opened a world. You know, a lot of us have LinkedIn. Now you have other tools that can do exactly what Jason said, maybe not to Pinterest perspective, right? But like for technology, it'll source the GitHub site, right? It'll source if people been published, what have they been published about? And so it actually gives you more content than just what someone's put on their LinkedIn profile that they want you to know about. And it actually helps expose and expand the capability of the people that you're finding and can actually bring you a greater talent pool than you've ever been having access to. It's also, for me, in my experience, allowed us to recruit 10 times faster. Oop, it seems like I lost my video. I'll pass it over to someone else.
I was going to add, like, I think the other thing that AI has opened up doors for is like being able to do things around talent brand that we maybe weren't able to do before. So I'm not someone who is a designer or someone who's like really versed in kind of the creative side of creating brand work. I have ideas, but the actual like being able to do it, I've had to rely on design teams in the past. And there's a lot of tools out there that help you create these really beautiful creative design content that you can then share. So there's a lot of ways that you can make beautiful slides now for like when you're doing presentations. So there's a lot of really cool tools around talent brand that I think are really empowering recruiting teams to move faster because they don't have to rely on other resourcing.
Just to jump in there, if that's okay, Kate. Yeah, I strongly agree with I think the comments on the last two questions, which is essentially around, hey, some of these areas where we need to make decisions on candidates, it's a little bit risky, but other areas where we need a productivity bump, you know, where maybe Tiana previously would go and speak to a sort of a designer and rely on their availability to help them with something. Actually, now AI can help you with those things, and you'll still be the decider of whether that's a good output or not. So you're still maintaining that accountability. It's just literally the human hours that go into creating that output that have massively diminished. So that's where I would say, when you think about what does AI bring to the table for us, that's where we're seeing the most value. Essentially, think to yourself, where are the areas where either actually when I do it myself, it's not a very differentiated output. Like anyone could be doing this thing. I'm having to do it because that's the way the cookie crumbled this time, but actually it could be anyone. Or I'm doing this thing and I feel like I'm doing it on autopilot. Maybe there's an autopilot out there that can do it for me. Those are, and then you'll be amazed at how much time you get back in your day, or more actually how many almost cognitive cycles you get back to be able to think about higher leverage things and ways to really move the needle for your organization. So that's where we see the most impact, and less so actually on these decision oriented things, because as folks have pointed out, it's an incredibly humans are really at the center of our role here, which is not true for every other industry, and they're going to be maybe disrupted in other ways. But for us, we're pretty lucky that humans are at the center of this thing, which means they're always going to want some human interaction on the other end of that as well.
So thinking about the humans as candidates, we've looked at the humans from the employer perspective and the organization perspective, but from a candidate perspective, how do you think organizations can approach the use of candidate AI in interviews? So much like in the past where, there was this big debate about whether calculators should be allowed in a maths exam. What's your opinion on candidates using AI for their interviews and for their application processes? Who would like to take that one first? Jason, do you fancy doing that one?
Sure, I'll jump in here. I'm bullish on this. At the end of the day, I think, using the tools that are available to you to demonstrate your ability to either move quicker or to articulate what you're trying to do is ultimately a good thing. Like when we think through the lens of like a software engineer, in your job, after you get hired, we would never tell someone not to use Stack Overflow, not to go Google how to work a particular library framework, syntax of a language. And in that same vein, why would we restrict the tools that are available? Now, where you can kind of elevate that beyond just using the tool to generate a snippet of code or pseudocode is assess for understanding. Great, you just use this Gen AI tool to create this snippet of code. What is it doing? How do you implement it? What are the design patterns that you're looking at? And when you kind of balance the approach of, yes, use the tool, and then check for understanding, what you're getting at here is not memorization of how to solve a problem. You're getting to the core of, does this person actually know how to solve the problem, the task at hand, which is a much harder thing to solve for. In interviews today, so often folks grind and memorize LEET code, the top hardest questions. Then you ask them one of the easier questions, or a question that doesn't even show up on LEET code, where they don't recognize that pattern that you're asking them to solve for. Sometimes folks can get stumped. Are you hiring folks who are very good at memorizing things, or are you hiring folks that can solve problems? I think we should bias towards the folks that can actually solve the problems, not the ones that can memorize or have access to that.
I'm completely aligned with Jason. I'm totally on this. Well, and also the fact that I work for an AI company, so we want and encourage and are wanting people to show that they have that capability. I also want to double down on what we said earlier on the call, which was that AI, people are going to be using AI are the ones that are going to actually be able to survive the change, right? Like, I mean, double down on your calculator comment, Kate. How many people are going around and lighting our street lights, the gas lighters, right? The oil lighters are no longer around. You have to be able to figure out how to grow and upskill yourself. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to be left behind. So I actually am very bullish about this, like Jason.
How about you, Tiana?
I'm very in line with that. I think that really finding like top tier talent is around finding people that solve problems creatively. And so depending on the tools that they use, I mean, even when I hire recruiters on my team, I ask them, like, what are some of the tools that you use? Talk me through how you actually solve your day-to-day problems. Because everyone solves problems differently. And so it's getting to really understand like how they're actually approaching things, how they do discovery, how they actually are kind of thinking through like what their structured thinking is like in their own mind, because you want people to approach that differently. So very in line with that.
It's interesting that you start talking about your team. Sorry, Sile, to jump in. We've had a question about team resistance internally. and how you guys can look at what to do with that team resistance about adopting data-driven approaches to talent acquisition. Kyle, do you want to jump into that one straight away?
Well, I was going to follow on Tiana's point, so just really quick, if I could. I think essentially a lot of it comes down to assessment design. If your current assessment process involves lots of sort of, fact-based questions, and you expect that to let you know sort of how whatever learned or intelligent this person is, then of course you're going to get every candidate passing with flying colors, and you're not really doing your job. And I think the same thing actually applies to the more behavioral or conversational interviews, where if you essentially are looking for these cookie cutter, if what you're looking for in a candidate is the same thing that everyone else is looking for, then yeah, you may end up with these sort of like very repetitive answers to your sort of principles or cultural values questions. So I think it's going to force organizations to be a lot more opinionated about what they truly value in the people that they're bringing to the company, such that I, as a candidate, if I was using a sort of a GPT generated answer, I'm highly likely to not answer in a way that resonates with you, so it's not really helping me. So I think that's going to be a sort of very positive consequence, actually, is I think there's been a lot of organizations that are presenting a culture that is frankly not reflective of what they really value. They're reflecting maybe what the world thinks they should value. And I think there's various reasons why that's changing, but I think this will be another accelerant for that, which will be useful. So yeah, sorry, I appreciate you asked a different question, Kate, but I had that in mind and I wanted to share it.
No, I'm very pleased you weren't too British and you decided to share it. That's great. I'm reminding myself always to stop being so British. So let's look at the talent resistance, because a lot of the people who are attending this summit are those on the front line of talent acquisition. So I can see from the chat that we have some opposing viewpoints on it. So have any of you got any suggestions as to how to encourage individuals within those talent teams to be able to adopt data-driven approaches?
Well, my first take is understanding the root cause of why they are struggling to adopt it. What's their fear? And help them get past that. It's kind of like anything when you're trying to promote someone to a higher level and you're trying to get them to start delegating down or training someone else to take over. There's that fear of like, oh, you're trying to train, you want me to train this person to replace me. No, I'm trying to train you to upgrade you, right? To get you to be able to do higher things, more complicated things, more strategic things. So I think part of that is bringing them along and helping them understand where you're taking them and hearing from them what their roadblocks are and helping them get past them.
I'll add to that. I think that, AI is happening regardless or not of whether anyone wants it to. Like, this is actually going to be the future of recruiting. And so, like I said before, humans who are embracing and kind of really trying to get on the boat are going to be the ones that are going to get there the fastest, because it's happening. And I think that there's certain pieces of the talent pipeline that aren't right now. I don't foresee it changing. Like, I don't see AI being able to close a candidate. I don't see them being able to do the last mile of things. I do see AI being able to help create content on that recruiters can share on like why they should join the company, or helping to give talking points. But it's going to take a human to do the human stuff, and selling is one of the most important pieces of a pipeline, and it takes a human to do that. And so for recruiters who want to embrace AI, they can spend more time doing those pieces of things, prepping candidates for interviews, building relationship and connection. Like, a lot of people join companies because they feel like a human connection to the interview panel, to their recruiter. I know that feedback that I've been given when I do recruiting myself, because I always have a rec, and is that like they felt a connection and they felt like I valued their time, and there was like that human element. And so that's something that I think isn't going away.
Agree with everything. I think one big thing that's different about this wave of technology is it's incredibly capable of adapting to the individual. So I think a lot of people's sort of previous resistance towards adopting technology was, well, it forces me to do things in a way that we've sort of like centrally decided this is the structure, and now I'm sort of the cog in the machine to sort of contribute to this centralized process. This revolution is very different. it is able to wrap around how you want to do your work. So I don't really look at this as, don't get me wrong, there is definitely some sort of resistance from certain corners at adopting these type of tools, but it's less around getting people to change the way they work. It's almost in many ways enabling people to finally, oh, you remember all that stuff I told you? You have to go and update the ATS with this way and that way, and then you've got to do this and fill this information in here, and I was forcing you to do it. You don't actually have to do that anymore, because that, I agree, was terrible, boring work. We've got AI to do that for you. Now you can do what you want to do, which is create great relationships with other human beings. So if you don't like that side of the work, the create great relationships with human beings, yeah, probably not. This revolution is not going to help you that much. But I think most people do. Most people in this industry do. So I actually think the proof should be in the sort of adoption, and then like quite visceral realization by the recruiters, maybe the IC recruiters, that this is helping them go about their day and leave their day more energized and not with a massive long list of things they still need to do. If it's not doing that, then we're probably not implementing it in the way we should be.
Jason, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Well, somewhat. I'd understood the question to be about encouraging teams to be a little bit more data-driven. And I think in order to even get these tools into the environment, that's the foundation. Recruiting or talent acquisition, I've always kind of taught recruiters I've worked with or talent acquisition teams that hiring is a little bit of an art. And by being data-driven, you do bring it into a science. And if you don't know what's happening through each stage of your funnel, each stage of your pipeline, how do you understand how to solve for the problems that you have? Do you even know what those problems are? Other aspects of the business, they measure their success, and they can do it sometimes more tangibly, depending on the role, than we can. But in order to have a seat at the table, if you can't talk about the data, if you can't talk about what's happening, you won't even be able to have that conversation around implementing these new tools. And I fully agree that these tools, they will give recruiters, be it managers, leaders, ICs, lift in those areas where we're just spending cycles that could be more productive, that could be used for more conversations, for capturing those things that are actually important to a candidate. Because at the end of the day, I don't think closing a candidate is a conversation just around compensation. It's aligning what's important to that person, what do they care about, what's the intangible about the career development and the scope, and then also talking about the people that they're going to work with. That's the human element here. Hiring is not just about filling roles. When we lose sight of what it's actually about, the human element, we forget that we can use talent acquisition as a competitive advantage in our hiring processes, where we can identify the right candidates at the right time for the right roles. And you have to open yourself up for the opportunity to take it from a order-taking service of filling these roles to being a true talent partner or advisor to building best-in-class teams, regardless of the function.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see what happens. I am excited I have a seat at the table to be able to watch the change. And I think that was a really nice point to be able to wrap up on. So I just want to thank all of you for joining our panel today. Thank you to the audience for the fantastic questions that we've had them put through, and also to thank our previous keynote and lightning round speakers too. So from Deel and Ashby, thanks to everyone, and we look forward to welcoming you to another summit moving forward. Many thanks.